My stepmother called me a witch for 10 years, and my father held the lantern while she hunted me. I need you to understand something before we get into the weeds. I am not looking for a reunion. I've reached the last dab of this particular chapter of my life. The destination isn't forgiveness, it's absolute, unshakable indifference. I'm telling you this so you know exactly where we're landing, even if the flight back through my childhood is a bit turbulent. It started with a misplaced set of keys, which, in my stepmother's mind, wasn't just carelessness, it was a dark ritual. She was a woman who saw shadows where there were none. Consequently, my entire adolescence became a minefield of spiritual interventions and thinly veiled accusations. I learned to keep my head down, yet the target on my back only seemed to grow. My dad watched it all. He sat in his recliner, sipping coffee, choosing to ignore the trembling in my hands. I'd try to reason with him, consequently, he'd tell me to just submit to her rules to keep the house quiet. The conflict wasn't just the stepmother, it was the suffocating silence of a father who prioritized a peaceful dinner over his own child's sanity. I left as soon as I could. I moved 3 states away, changed my number, and finally learned what silence sounded like without someone screaming about curses in the hallway. I spent years in therapy untangling the knots they tied in my brain. Nevertheless, the ghost of that house still lingered. Then, out of nowhere, an email arrived. It was a formal, typed-out apology from her. She spoke of spiritual enlightenment and regret. I stared at the screen, however. The words felt like paper-thin shields. She owned her abuse, which I suppose counts for something, but it didn't change the decade of stolen youth. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Therefore, I turned to my sister for a status update, hoping the air was finally clearing. The reality was colder than I expected. My dad hadn't sent a word. No apology. No, I'm sorry I failed you. Instead, he's been spending his evenings painting me as the villain to the extended family, spinning tales of my ungrateful departure. The irony is sharp enough to cut glass. She apologizes, but he doubles down on the lies. See, the lens I want you to view this through isn't about family drama, it's about the economy of truth. In any toxic system, the perpetrators need a narrative to keep the ecosystem running. She needed a witch to feel righteous. He needs a disloyal child to feel like a blameless father. They aren't interested in the truth of who I am, they are interested in the utility of who I used to be. If I were to engage with that apology, I'd be validating their new narrative. I'd be stepping back into the performance. If I open that door, they get to define the terms of my existence all over again. I'm done. I have built a life that is entirely mine, brick by brick, and it is a space where no one gets to decide if I'm cursed or difficult. My dad's bad-mouthing is just noise in a frequency I no longer tune into. I've realized that the greatest power you can hold over people who try to destroy you is your utter lack of concern for their opinion. They want a response. They want a fight. They want me to be the bad guy in their story because that makes them the heroes of their own. Consequently, I give them nothing. No rage. No tears. No contact. It's funny, the peace I've found isn't the kind you get from a resolution. It's the kind you get from walking away from the table entirely. I don't need them to understand my side, and I certainly don't need their permission to be happy. The story of the witch ends here, not with a spell, but with a simple, quiet closing of a door. And honestly, it's the most liberating thing I've ever done. You know, reflecting on this, the hardest part wasn't the accusations. It wasn't even the years of feeling like an outsider in my own home. The hardest part was the realization that I was waiting for them to see me correctly. I was waiting for the apology or the explanation to prove I wasn't the villain they painted. But here's the reality shift. You can spend your entire life trying to correct someone else's version of your story, or you can just close the book and start writing a new one. When people are committed to misunderstanding you, your silence isn't a defeat. It's actually the most powerful statement you can make. It's you saying, my value isn't dependent on your validation. If you're currently in a position where you're trying to defend your character to people who have already decided who you are, take this as your sign. Stop. Save that energy for the people who actually see you. Build your own narrative, live it loudly, and let them talk to the empty air. Thanks for listening to this one. It was a tough chapter to close, but I'm ready for what's next. Catch you in the next one.